Okay, right, here we are again with Dr. Carl Griffin of the University of Sussex. Hi, Carl, again. Some of you will have seen his first and second videos. This is the third of the three. This one is much more focused for the people doing the third year level 6 module on 19th century rural social protest rather than crime, violence and disorder module. But I hope you guys, you third years, will have looked at the first two as well. Now, the topic, Carl, for now really is to get us thinking geographically in many respects, but at a quite simple and straightforward level, I admit. Your own work, as the students will know, very much focused on the swing riots of the 1830s and perhaps beyond, debatable. What we notice, or what we see very strongly when we're studying, let's say, the long run of overt social protest, again, debatable term, in rural Britain as it evolves over the course of the 19th century is what we've called in the module a kind of retreat, if you want, or that's a fairly, again, difficult term, a retreat to the Celtic periphery. Compare that, though, to the work that's been done most recently in the revival of protest studies, as you very rightly say, in the rural war over the last 10 years or so, and that focus is very much around southern England. So I'm beginning to wonder, really, and I'd really like to hear your opinion on this, how applicable is some of the really exciting stuff done by yourself and people like Navikas and Bryony and Peter Jones. How is that? How can we translate that into a study of these really important, to my mind at least, Celtic events? Over to you.
Okay, that's again, Ian, that's a really kind of suggestive and interesting set of ideas and questions. I think I'd like to preface my answer
as ever, Carl,
with something of a mea culpa. And that's I followed my own kind of personal interest. I followed the archive, and that's kind of led me to what outwardly might be kind of understood to be something of an obsession with the counties of southeast and southwest and southwest.
It is an obsession, Carl. It's nothing else but an obsession.
Well, I have somehow managed to get beyond Kent and end up in Somerset, and even a piece that's just coming out in the historical journal. As far down as Devon.
Good Lord,
I know, which kind of worries me slightly. But against that, I do agree that there is something, or what could be kind of perceived, what could be read as kind of obsession with the southern kind of heartlands of England in some of the kind of recent revisions work. And that necessarily maps onto kind of longer running trends as well in the historiography of rural process from the really from the late 1970s through to the early 1990s. For again, much of the work of, say, Roger Wells was focused on Sussex, now my county of work. And against all that, we mustn't forget as well that some of the work from that time did focus on the Celtic Griffin.
Yeah.
So John Rawle's doctoral work, for instance, was on Cornwall, on the Cornish miner, and we mustn't forget the importance of John Rawle's work and the concepts he developed in the context of Cornwall in terms of understanding the geographies of rural protest more broadly. Nor should we forget that some of the current work is focused on the northern counties, about the totemic focus of industrialising Lancashire and parts of industrialising Yorkshire.
Yeah.
So there is a more kind of a heterogeneous geography the historiography of rural protests, both past and present. But against all that, I think, Ian, your point probably still holds. So what can we take from this kind of recent upsurging work, whatever its complex geographies, and how might we apply it to the Celtic Britain? Well, I think firstly, the recent emphasis upon protest practices, I think, is highly applicable for our kind of broader understanding of kind of the many kind of techniques of resistance which are deployed by rural workers, applies whether it's in East Kent or East Lanarkshire. The concepts are broadly the same, and their application is often the same. The emphasis again on language, of symbolism, also on kind of material cultures, I think plays out too. There is much that could be better understood about cultures of popular protest, cultures of rural protest in Scotland, and Wales and Ireland, using those techniques which have been honed in other spatial contexts. And beyond all that as well, I think it's kind of useful to think creatively too about how the questions which cannot be answered by the archive, particularly kind of southern England, in relation to, say, the transmission of the influence of radical actions in late 18th, early 19th century Ireland might impact upon the wider kind of British countryside, and also the kind of the longer running histories of opposition to enclosure and forms of dispossession that, Ian, you deal with so kind of magnificently in the book that I will always refer to as the later Highland Vandals, aka landscapes of protest.
Thank you. Yes, I mean it is interesting. We've had a look on this module on David Featherstone's work. In fact, spent the whole of a couple of hours just trying to unpick his
quite right.
His rather interesting but no less tricky paper on the White Boys and how that gets translated to London. But I'd love to know what your opinion of that paper is.
Well, I think it's a super paper. It comes out of Dave's doctoral work.
Yeah.
Although he has kind of returned in some ways to thinking about kind of radical politics and radical context in 18th century Ireland subsequently, including in a paper that came out in a special issue of the American Journal of Historical Geography last year.
Of course, yes.
1790s radicalism in Ireland. That paper, though, is important beyond the context of Ireland, beyond the context of the Celtic periphery, for it kind of reminds us of the kind of the complex material tellings of protest in the countryside. One of the things it looks at in relation to white boyism, which is also the same for kind of ribbonism in rural Ireland, was the symbolic value that was placed onto living things, particularly in the context of white boys and cattle, and their offing, the cattle being invested with kind of agency by the rural dispossessed as being these symbols of capitalism, of being lively, fleshy capitalism, capital. So I think that's important.
It's interesting, isn't it, though, taking it back to a slightly more prosaic level, he brings white boyism into London, doesn't he, in a way, into the southeast. Now bear with me, I'm going to make a slightly contentious point. Now, as you know, my own ex-PhD supervisor, Charlie Withers, introduced this really interesting idea of hegemony into protest studies, with looking at the Highland Land Wars of an earlier period, the 1880s, through to about the 1920s. And it strikes me as quite interesting that Featherstone's paper is celebrated in ways that Charlie's work isn't always. And I wonder if that's because, and I think I'm stretching the point far too far here, but it is provocative. Is because he focuses on Scotland only, on the periphery only. He doesn't bother about bringing this into the heartland of the southeast.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting thesis. I think, regrettably, but in some ways kind of understandably, the centre of power politically, culturally, in 18th and 19th century Britain, and in kind of 21st century kind of in terms of 21st century kind of intellectual trajectories, is London and its hinterlands.
Well, as you prove by moving from Queen's Belfast to Sussex.
Yes, I suppose I'm kind of tied up implicit in all of those kind of networks of ideas. I'm not sure I entirely agree with kind of the influence or lack of influence of Charlie with his kind of early work on the Highlands. I think perhaps he also kind of attached a little too much kind of credit to him for the concept of kind of hegemony and kind of process studies, but I think he was kind of really kind of drawing upon very suggestive and perhaps kind of implicit rather than explicit work by Mark Billinge and by Jack Langton.
Yes, and of course Billinge was Charlie's mate anyway, or remains Charlie's mate.
Indeed.
Yep.
And I think Charlie with his work kind of very quickly shifted kind of beyond the Highlands after its publication.
Well, very much so.
So
yes.
there was never any kind of consolidation of those those ideas. And I think because work on Scottish process in particular rather fell from favour from the mid 1980s. It was kind of published at kind of an unhelpful time to be picked up. And as is always the case, there is kind of a tendency in process studies and other parts of history to kind of imagine, to believe that a new set of individuals, a new generation of scholars have come up with kind of new concepts and new ideas, and not necessarily kind of pay kind of heed to earlier work. And I think that would be true of sort of Charlie with his kind of work on hegemony. But I absolutely agree that Dave Featherstone's work is kind of highly useful for its kind of emphasis on webs of resistance, on kind of emphasising kind of networks that even kind of events in kind of in rural kind of 1720s, 1730s kind of Ireland was being impacted upon by global webs of capitalism and by kind of the influence of policy making in Westminster, and particularly the need for Irish kind of absentee kind of landlords, invariably kind of living in London, to use their kind of Irish expropriated kind of property to kind of support their cultural and political lives in London. So this is kind of a form of early kind of ecological colonialism.
Wonderful phrase.
Converting kind of the small kind of cottier's holdings of rural Ireland into vast kind of graziers estates. It doesn't look that different, if you like, to thinking about the ecological transformations which were kind of were made later on in that century, particularly the early 19th century in New Zealand, through the work of sheep.
Yes.
Rather than through cattle.
Yes. It's fascinating, isn't it? How now our thinking in protest studies really has moved away, and I think David's work is absolutely key in this. Moved away from simply thinking about purely human actors to thinking about these associations, this kind of nature culture thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's something which is genuinely kind of novel about the re-emergence of kind of interest in rural protest. It's not something which is figured in kind of earlier work, perhaps with the kind of the exception of thinking about kind of, although he doesn't use these terms, kind of the ecologies of existence in the forests of southern England, of E.P. Thompson's 19th century.
Back to him again.
Weeks and Hunters, back to Thompson, all kind of roads, intellectually speaking, go back to Thompson. But yeah, this emphasis on kind of material world, in thinking beyond culture, in thinking about the way in which kind of plants, the way in which kind of animals, the way in which food, the way in which kind of buildings, the way in which kind of the landscapes and the heath and the common, the open field, not only kind of lent kind of economic meaning, but also kind of added kind of culturally to the lives of the poor, is novel. And I think thinking about those kind of life worlds and thinking about their complexities is kind of hugely important. So I think the fact that these kind of ideas have been picked up in all sorts of places, in kind of 18th century Ireland, in early 20th century Scotland, in the context of your own work here, as well as in 19th century kind of England, is kind of highly suggestive. It shows about how important these ideas are.
Well, as you, I'm sure, realise, Carl, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, this hint towards moral ecology rather than economy is a really interesting shift, I think. But as we've run out of time, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you. And the whole video just moves. Oh, God, I didn't.